What's going on, my dear friends? Today in this video, let's learn and master the Angular framework's latest version. So let's get started. Alright guys, in this section we are going to dive into another super important lifecycle hook in Angular, which is NgOnInit. So what is NgOnInit all about and why do we need it to know it? So first thing first, what exactly is NgOnInit? Well, NgOnInit is a lifecycle hook that Angular calls after the component has been initialized. It's like the ready to go signal for your component. Think of it like this. When you are setting up for a party, you first get all your decorations and food ready. So that's like the components being created. But the party doesn't really start until everyone's arrived and you say, let's begin. So that let's begin moment is what NgOnInit is for your component. Now you might be wondering, why do we need NgOnInit? So here is why. So guys, it's the perfect place to initialize your component's data. So if you need to fetch data from a server when your components loads, NgOnInit is where you typically do that. So any complex setup that shouldn't be in the constructor can go here. Remember, NgOnInit is called only once in the component's lifecycle right after the component has been initialized. Alright, so let's see how we can use NgOnInit in our code. For this guys, we'll use our profile component from the previous example. First, in order to work with this hook, we need to import onInit from Angular core. So go to the profile.component.ts file and add the import inside this same Angular core import. So after this, add a comma and the hook name is onInit. So guys, carefully follow these capital simple letters. This O and I must be uppercase letters. Perfect. Now next, so guys, in order to use this hook, we need to implement onInit lifecycle hook to our component class, right? So after this first onChanges hook, simply add a comma and add our current hook onInit. Now we are getting this compile error saying that the NgOnInit method is missing. So in order to work with this, we need to add this NgOnInit method inside this component class, right? So let's do this. Down here, add the method. So the method name is NgOnInit. Once again, carefully follow the naming convention. Now after this, the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this hook, let's add a console log. So console.log and set the log message something NgOnInit hook triggered. That's it. Now save this all and go to the browser. Open the browser console and you should see this message NgOnInit triggered. So guys, unlike the previous hook, we don't need any input values or anything. This NgOnInit will automatically triggers when the component initialized. So one more thing, now this component is fully initialized. That's why we are seeing this component view inside the browser, right? As I said previously, after the component fully initialized, we cannot trigger this NgOnInit method again. Wait, now if I click this change username button, this will change the username value and this triggered the onChanges hook for the second time. However, guys, this does not trigger the NgOnInit. So what I am trying to explain is that this NgOnInit will only trigger once. So after that, this onInit hook will not trigger again, no matter what changes happen inside the component. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, so NgOnInit is a crucial lifecycle hook in Angular. It's called once the component is initialized and its binding are resolved, making it the perfect place for initialization logic, especially when you need access to input properties or need to make API calls. So guys, keep this in your mind. Use the NgOnInit for complex initialization, especially those involving input properties or data fetching. The NgOnInit is called only once per component's lifecycle. Hope you guys got the idea. I think that's it for NgOnInit. So practice this in your components to get a better feel for how it works. So in the next section, we'll cover another important lifecycle hook, NgDoCheck. So see you there. Alright, so guys, in the previous lecture, we looked at the NgOnInit lifecycle hook. So before we move on to the next hook, let's look at the constructor method in this component. So guys, this constructor is not something coming with the Angular, or it's not fall under lifecycle hooks. And by default, constructor method is coming with the TypeScript. However, in order to understand the NgOnInit lifecycle, we have to understand this constructor method's behavior as well. So let's dive in. The first question is, what is a constructor? Well, a constructor is a special method in a class that gets triggered automatically when an instance of the class is created. In Angular terms, it's the first method that's called when a component is initiated. Think of it like the birth of a component. Just like when a baby is born, there are certain things that happen immediately inside the baby's body, right? So that's what the constructor is for in the life of a component. Alright, so let's see how we can use a constructor in our code. We'll use our profile component from previous examples. So let's create the constructor method. So for this guys, we don't need to add any imports, just simply create the method. So inside this, before this NgOnInit, add this constructor. After this, add the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, let's log a message, so then we can simply check when this constructor method will trigger. So add this console.log and add the message something, constructor method triggered. That's it. Now save this and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, inside the browser console, we can see this message constructor method triggered. So guys, as I said, this constructor method will trigger when this component class new instance created. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, now you guys might be thinking, wait a minute, couldn't we just do everything in the constructor instead of using NgOnInit lifecycle hook? And these both triggered almost at the same time, right? Well, it's not exactly like that. So let's see why. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log this input variable in this constructor method and also inside the NgOnInit hook. So let's do this. Inside the constructor method, after this first log, add another log and add the input variable p username inside this parentheses. This dot p username. Now copy and paste this same log inside the NgOnInit as well. That's it. So now save this and refresh your browser. Look at the console logs. Can you spot the difference? So guys, inside the browser console, you will see that in the constructor, the username is undefined. But in NgOnInit, it has a value. Can you guys tell me what is the problem here? Guys, this is because input properties aren't set until after the constructor has run, but they are available by the time NgOnInit runs. Wait, let's make it more simple. Alright, so guys, the constructor method isn't something that coming with the Angular framework. This is by default coming with the TypeScript class. In other words, this is something a JavaScript class feature. So when this run, the TypeScript class or our component class will create an instance of that class inside the memory or in our computer RAM. Simply this will allocate a memory space for this. After that, this will allocate spaces for variables and other methods that are included inside this class. So if take our profile component, When we run this, first this profile component class will allocate a memory space for this or create an instance of this component class inside our PC RAM. After that, the constructor method will trigger immediate after this allocation of the memory space. At this time, the component class is empty. There is nothing inside this. So that's why we are getting this undefined. Because there is no pusername input variable value to print inside the browser console. So that's why we are getting the undefined at this constructor stage. So hope you guys got the idea. Next, let's look at our second scenario. So guys, the NgOnInit hook will trigger after the component fully initialized or fully loaded all its variables and methods inside the memory. So in this case, when trigger this NgOnInit hook, this input pusername is already initialized and ready to use. So that's how we get the input variable value printed inside the browser console. So this is what I was trying to tell you guys. And this is the main difference between this NgOnInit lifecycle hook and the constructor method. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright. So guys, mostly we use the constructor for dependency injection and simple initialization that don't depend on input properties. So we'll use NgOnInit for more complex initialization, especially those that rely on input properties of fetching data. Okay, so now that we know that constructors are for, so let's talk about some best practices for this constructor method. First, keep it simple. The constructor should be lightweight, so avoid complex logics or heavy computations. Next, use the constructor only for injecting dependencies. Next, avoid async operations. Don't make HTTP calls or start complex async operations inside the constructor method. And at last, don't access the DOM. The view isn't ready in the constructor, so don't try to access DOM elements inside this constructor. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so that's it for the constructor. So guys, practice using them in your components to get a better feel for how they work. So in the next, we'll cover another important concepts in Angular. Alright, so let's move on to the next lesson. Alright guys, let's move on to our next lifecycle hook in Angular, NgDoCheck. So what's NgDoCheck all about and why do we need to know it? So let's begin. Alright guys, so first thing first, what exactly is NgDoCheck? Well, NgDoCheck is a lifecycle hook that Angular calls during every change detection run. It's like a vigilant guard, constantly checking for changes in your component. Think of it like this. Imagine you are watching a busy street from your window. Every time a car passes by, even if it is the same car, you look out to see what's happening. That's what NgDoCheck does for your component. It checks for changes every time Angular's change detection runs, even if nothing has actually changed. Now you might be wondering, why do we need to use this NgDoCheck lifecycle hook? Here's why. So this has custom change detection approach. So it allows you to implement your own custom change detection. So next, it's useful when Angular's default change detection might miss changes in complex objects or arrays. So next, you can use it to track how often change detections run. But guys, remember, with a greater power comes great responsibility. So the NgDoCheck lifecycle hook can be called very frequently. So we need to be careful not to put heavy operations in here. Alright, so let's see how we can use NgDoCheck in our code. We'll use our same profile component for this as well. So first we need to import doCheck from Angular core, same like previous. So guys, now we don't need to add the import manually. We'll do this using the autocomplete way. So just implement this doCheck lifecycle hook in our component class. So we already used this implement for the previous hooks. So just pass our new hook interface after this. So add a comma and the hook name is doCheck. Carefully follow these simple capital letters. Now guys, select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. Perfect. Now in order to work with this doCheck hook, we have to add the NgDoCheck method inside this class. So down here, create an NgDoCheck method. Don't forget to add the parentheses and the method scope. Next, inside this, let's add a log, console.log, and set the log as something NgDoCheck triggers. That's it. Now save this and go to the browser, open your browser console, and you might be surprising by how many times you see NgDoCheck triggered logged inside this browser console. So here we see that this doCheck log printed twice. So at the initial stage of this component, we are passing the username value from the parent component. So by default, we added this input property value as an empty string. So when we receiving the input value from the parent, so this will change. So in this case, Angular change detection will get active and update our components value and the browser view. So this change detection will trigger the NgDoCheck method as well. So that's how we got the second NgDoCheck triggered log message inside the browser console. So how this first doCheck printed here? So this printed on the initial stage of components declared. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so now let's click on this update user button. This time also this triggered the NgDoCheck. So guys, NgDoCheck is a powerful lifecycle hook that allows us to implement custom change detection logics. It's called during every change detection run, enabling you to inspect and react to changes in your component state. This is especially useful when the default Angular change detection doesn't cover your specific needs. Alright, so guys, that's it for the NgDoCheck lifecycle hook. So practice using it to get a better understanding of how it works. So in the next section, we'll cover the ng after content init hook and see how it helps with project content. Alright, before we move on to the next lifecycle hook, some of you guys might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't this NgDoCheck hook similar to NgOnChanges? Well, it's not exactly similar to the NgOnChanges hook. The NgDoCheck hook is a part of Angular's change detection mechanism. Unlike NgOnChanges, which only gets called when input properties change, NgDoCheck is called during every change detection run. This allows you to implement your own change detection logic and catch changes that NgOnChanges might miss. So let's set up an example to see how NgDoCheck works compared to the NgOnChanges. For this guys, we'll set up a variable inside the profile component, something. We'll name it counter, set the variable type as number and set a default value 0. Now let's render this inside the browser view. How do we do that? Yes, of course, for this we will use this string interpolation. So inside the profile component HTML file and add this. Let's put this inside of an h1 tags. So create h1 tag and inside this add this string interpolation. Inside this string interpolation, pass the counter variable. Now save this and go to the browser. We can see this counter value. Now let's add a simple logic to increment this counter value when clicking a button. So go to the profile HTML file and create a button tags and set a button text something increment counter. Next, from this button, let's call a method. So for this, bind a click event and call a method from this. So set the method name as something increment counter. After this, don't forget to add the parentheses. Now inside the profile component is file, create this method. The method name is increment counter. Add the parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, let's increment the counter value. For this we can use the increment operator, right? So inside this method, this dot counter, after this add the increment operator, double plus signs. So guys, this will simply increase the current value of this counter value by 1. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Now we can see these values inside the browser. So guys, this username is coming from the parent component and this counter value is declared inside the profile component. So inside the browser console, we got these NgOnChanges and doCheck methods, triggers, logs. So now what I want to do is, now just click on the change username button. Username changed, right? Inside the browser console, wait, let's clear the console so you guys can see this clearly. Now our console is empty. Again, click on the change user button. Inside the console, we got this NgOnChanges triggered and also we got the ngDoCheck triggered log, which means when we updating these input property value, this triggered the both lifecycle hooks. But if I click on this counter button, as you guys can see here, every time I click the counter, this triggered only the ngDoCheck lifecycle hook, not the onChanges hook. So the lesson here is NgOnChanges hook is only called when the input property reference changes, but the ngDoCheck hook is called during every change detection that happens inside our component. So this is the main difference between the NgOnChanges and the ngDoCheck hook. Hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so in summary, the ngDoCheck hook is a powerful but tricky lifecycle hook in Angular. It's called during every change detection run, giving you fine-grained control over detecting changes in your component. But keep this, remember, use ngDoCheck for custom change detection logics. It's called very frequently, so keep the logic inside this lightweight. It can catch changes that NgOnChanges might miss, especially in complex objects. So, and last but not least, be mindful of performance implications when using this ngDoCheck. Awesome. I think that's it for the ngDoCheck lifecycle hook. So once again, practice it's your own, but remember to use it with caution. So in the next section, we'll cover another important lifecycle hook in Angular. So let's move on.